Hi, I'm Sharaad Kuttan and welcome to Consider This, the show that makes you or asks you to consider and reconsider the issues of the day. Now, Melissa Idris is taking a break, a well-deserved break today, and I have the singular pleasure of speaking to my guest tonight, Professor Meredith Weiss. She is a professor of political science at the State University of New York at Albany in the United States of America. A long-time Malaysian observer and written many books about Malaysia, including on the student movement. Thank you so much, Meredith, for being back. We've actually had many conversations on my other show, Let's Talk, where we talked about the reform agenda. We looked at many kind of aspects of that. So it's great to have you back here at a fascinating time. The fall of Pakatan Harapan. Were you surprised? Could this have been anticipated?
Yes and no. Everyone knew that keadilan itself was fractured, that there were real tensions over the succession plan, that Pakatan was having some difficulties in working out just how power should be shared out, who should be in charge, what the priorities should be. At the same time, the specific kind of crazy pattern by which this developed, I would not have predicted, and I would be surprised if anyone had quite predicted. It's a really unusual process.
So we're talking about the actual breakaway faction for PKR, the decision by Bersatu then to leave the Pakatan Harapan government, Mahathir's own decision, the maneuvering, and the flip-flopping. Okay.
All of that.
All of that. Okay. And I think Malaysians had a front row seat on that.
It's a very creative Malaysia Boleh. I mean, this was really a novel way to form a government. Let's hope it's now stable, but that was an unusual process.
Okay, so you put the finger on the nub, on the problem, right? The question of stability. If a coalition could be so easily kind of taken apart, it's now put back together, couldn't it still be taken apart precisely because those conditions are still existing?
It could be taken apart for a number of reasons. So the initial tensions within Pakatan Harapan, those in some ways may still persist. We have these two split parties, keadilan and Bersatu both. That's inherently somewhat unstable. It's not clear whether those who are in Bersatu within the new Perikatan government will simply rejoin UMNO, for instance, or if they'll form a new party. But right now, just the identity of these parties themselves is somewhat unstable. The larger issue is that forming a coalition requires quite a bit of give and take and compromise and deciding on common objectives. It's not clear to an observer whether that's happened yet, whether this was more of an opportunistic process of counting seats and luring people from one side to the other, and both sides tried this, to make up the magical number of seats to have a majority, or whether there's been a real discussion about what compromises will be made such that each party or each politician, whether it's not a whole party, feels that their goals are best met by participating. So the stability, I think, is up in the air until there's some sort of platform, or certainly until we see seats divvied up for GE15.
Right. But we've already seen positions divvied up for the cabinet, right? And that is an indicator of some of the compromises that have been made, considering that PAS and UMNO are Muhyiddin's parliamentary base. I mean, it's a source of his power, as it were, in taking the position of Prime Minister. His exclusion of the top brass of UMNO and PAS in particular, what does that signal to you?
It signals that there's an effort to build loyalty and build stability by divvying up cabinet positions. I'm not the first to suggest this. This is really, Wong Chin-Huat, for instance, has written on this quite lucidly. PAS is comparatively underrepresented in the cabinet vis-a-vis Bersatu, for instance. So, as Chin-Huat has noted, in the new cabinet, just as in the old, Bersatu is overrepresented. And some of that undoubtedly has to do with who's in charge. But at the same time, it could work. I'm not sure it worked for Pakatan Harapan, so I don't think that simply divvying up cabinet positions is a necessarily adept way to build stability. It builds loyalty, but loyalty of individual politicians. That's not quite the same thing number one, that loyalty itself may fracture, but that's not the same thing as actually developing a common platform.
Right, a common platform, you mean within the parties, or between the parties. I do want to ask you about the faction that left PKR. Of the 11, one returned, Barubian returned to PKR before the formation of government. The 10 have all been rewarded, as it were. 3 full ministers, 6 deputy ministers, and then the person who was already the deputy speaker there. So that all 10 have now considerable rewards for what they've done. I mean, what do you think that will do to party politics when the reward system for defection seems so obvious? You will get a position if you defect.
It's not the best way, quite frankly, to form a stable government. It's a probably solid stopgap measure as a way to avoid falling to a vote of confidence, right? Because you ensure that those members of parliament have common interests with those of the head of the government, right? That they're all part of the same big G government of the cabinet. So that can be a way to ensure you have the seats, but that doesn't make governing necessarily any easier. And so there's still a question to me of if one could hop from one party to another, one could always hop the other direction. So there's the larger question of the Katat phenomenon itself, but it's also then the difficulties that one raises by developing what is a quite large cabinet in which different parties all feel that they're the kingmaker who managed to bring Muhyiddin to his majority, and therefore that their demands should be most rewarded.
Right, and then Sarawak, because and GPS are playing a very crucial role in this. But we have about a minute and a half before we take a break. Azmin Ali, who's explained this large campaign, say the problems are huge, and the problems are huge. Saifuddin Abdullah, former foreign minister under Pakatan, now Minister of Communications, saying that they have no manifesto. Now, stability, but stability for what, I think, is the question that needs to be asked.
Stability to survive a vote of confidence is what we have right now. I'm not of the school that thinks that a larger committee is the answer to solve larger problems. So I do definitely think that it's a healthy trend to decentralize decision-making to some extent. But building up a larger and larger cabinet, as we found in Malaysia in the past, is not necessarily the best way to build a government that can respond nimbly to very fast-changing and very difficult, intractable problems, especially when the fundamental ones of agenda setting for this government have yet to be addressed. So we have a broad promise, a good promise, to have Muhyiddin be Prime Minister for all Malaysians, which is, of course, a good thing to reassure people of, and to pursue economic development. There's a new COVID-19 task force, I think. So really recognizing that these are obvious, really daunting imperatives. But having more ministers or having more ministries is not necessarily the best or the only way to go about that. So I think it's more, this is a government that's formed of politicians formed of and by politicians rather than by voters. In other words, the voters cast their vote, they voted for these politicians have now shifted amongst themselves to form this new government. This practice of building the government's stability by cementing the loyalty of those politicians will create a government that probably can survive a no confidence vote. I think Mahathir is probably right that this government can then persist until the next election. That's a good starting point. But that's not itself a question, that doesn't answer the question of whether this government will be as well equipped as possible to solve the really difficult challenges that it now faces. It's a terrible time to be a government.
Absolutely. We'll take a short break on that note. Stay tuned to consider this.